Welcome to Quranomics. My name is SD, and today we're going to talk about uh, one verse that is one of the main roots or the excuses or the proofs that the so-called Sunnah religion, it's a sect, but I call it a Sunnah religion separate because it has nothing to do. It talks and speaks in the name of God, in the name of Islam, but they don't have that authority, and they are far away from it. But when we ask any person that belongs to a sect or denomination, and you ask them, what do you believe in? They're going to tell you, I believe in the Quran right here. They believe in the Quran and the Sunnah. The Sunnah is what the Prophet said during his lifetime. Now, the Quran was recorded during the lifetime of the Prophet. But the Sunnah, the Hadith that they say, was not recorded until 200, 250 years after the Prophet's death. So amazing how everyone all of a sudden remembered what his grandfather and forefather was saying about the Prophet until they gathered up to 700,000 different hadiths and they narrowed it down to 5,000 hadiths. And it's still full of mistakes because everyone was writing his own biography. So this is how they created this, and who's responsible for this is a man named Imam Shafi'i, Ahmed Idris Shafi'i. He's the founder and establisher of this religion. It's called Sunnah religion, not the religion of God. Sunnah religion, or you have Shia religion, or you have Sufi religion, or you have Abadi religion. All these so-called man-made religion. Now, one of the main verses that Shafi'i abstracted from the Quran and twisted it to mean that gave him the authority to establish a new religion in the name of Allah and give people the idea that he is ruling in the name of the Prophet. He used a small verse. There was a verse that was was the focal point of a story, but he chopped off this one verse and made it a sentence, and based on that, he established the so-called Sunnah that gives him the power to rule in the name of the Prophet or the Messenger. And so now all these sects and denomination in so-called Islam, anytime they want to do something, they have to ask the scholar, is it halal? Is it haram? Is it okay? Is it a sin? Is it okay? Is it they rule your life day in and day out for the littlest detail. Even how you defecate, go to the bathroom, they'll tell you exactly what to do. Just to go to the bathroom, or sleeping with your wife, or having friends, or how you should conduct your day, or everything. They're just nosy and mind control. I mean, this is probably worse than socialism. So, but we're gonna go to this verse, and we will debunk or just give you the tool to answer them back. That the verse that you quoted has nothing to do with the Prophet or the Sunnah of the Prophet or the Sunnah of this religion that you establish. It has nothing to do with it. But you will combine another verse with it, and you can understand that the story was all about dividing the spoils of war. Period. It has nothing else to do with the Sunnah or establishing or ruling in the name of the Prophet. None of that. But we're going to go to that. We're going to flip over the screen. So now we're going to have this verse right here. And what the Prophet, now what God said, now here is, now before this verse is, before we read this verse, we're going to go to the first, so we understand how the verses came down and why they came down two separate verses. Okay. In Arabic, وَاعْلَمُوا إِنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَإِنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ وَذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وابن السبيل إن كنتم آمنتم بالله وما أنزلنا على عبدنا يوم الفرقان يوم التقى الجمعان والله على كل شيء قدير. Now, in English, know that whatever spoils you take, one-fifth you spoils you take or you earn, one-fifth is for Allah and the Messenger. One-fifth is for Allah, His Messenger, His close relatives, orphans, the poor, and needy travelers. If you truly believe in Allah and what we revealed to our servant on the day, on that decisive day when the two armies met at Badr, and Allah is most capable of everything. So we understand that this verse is talking about dividing the spoils of war, because you have the horseman gets two shares, and uh, with the regular soldier or army without a horse, without any extra equipment, will have one share. But a fifth of that spoil goes to the prophet and the people that we mentioned. Okay, now it's simple, right? So now ghanimtum, it means spoils of war that you've earned with a fight. Ghanimtum, ghanima, spoils, is derived from the word ghanama, as in sheep or something, something to be rich, because they call sheep ghanam. In Arabic, they call sheep ghanam. And also, ghanama means to get rich. Also, to get rich or to earn or to gain. So God is saying that whatever you gained from the spoils of war, you can have it, but one-fifth of it goes to the prophet and the messenger and his close relatives, orphans, the poor, and the needy travelers. So there's no problem here. Now, go to the second verse. This came later in another battle. God is saying, I'm going to read it in Arabic. So, ما أفاء الله على رسوله من أهل القرى فلله والرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم وما أتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب. Now, for over 250 years, until Shafi'i came, no one had a problem with this verse. No one said what he said. No one ever did that. But because he had a devious mind and he wanted to establish his power, he had the interest for his people, the scholars, to rule over the necks of the rule over the masses. He had to establish something in the name of God. So how is he going to do that? What verse is going to make him give him the power? So he took a verse, one of the verses. There's plenty of verses he took, and he established it as this is the sunnah of the prophet. But he used this. Now, from this verse in English, it says, "As for gains granted by Allah to His Messenger from the people of other land or the other villages, they are for Allah and the Messenger, His close relative, orphans, the poor, and needy travelers, so that wealth may not merely circulate among your rich. Whatever the Messenger gives you, take it, and whatever He forbids you, leave it. Forbids you from, leave it, and fear Allah. Surely Allah is severe punishment." Now, what's the difference between the two main differences between this verse and the verse before that? There's two. In this verse, he added that whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you from, leave it. This is the English translation, but in Arabic, it's a little bit more precise and a little complicated for non-Arabic speaking. But ma atakum in English says gives you. Whatever the messenger gives you. And let's just say the difference between give. There's another word in Arabic is ja'a wa ata. So let's just say, for in simple terms, it's like saying brought. He brought you and he gave you. He brought you, or I give you, or I brought you. The words are similar, but they mean two separate things. Now, the word atakum here, atakum, means that it goes for anything that is commonly known in in your circle. So when I ask for something, let's say, uh, give me a bottle of water, or someone came to me that I know, that's and that I know where it came from, where he came from, we say atakum or atani. He came to me, or he gave to me. It's from the known circle. We use the word atakum. The Quran uses the word ata. So whatever the prophet, the messenger atakum, that means whatever he gives you and or forbids you from, it's nothing from outside. It's something that he's basically is just a small law, an exemption of law, an amendment in the law that's commonly known among you. So this is about spoils of war. Nothing magical about it. So he's talking about the spoils of war. So in this situation, there's an exception. And the reason that God told the people that whatever the prophet gave you, take it, and whatever he forbids you from, also, and uh, leave it. So if he said prophet says yes, it's a yes. If he says no, it's a no. So why would he use that verse? Why would he use that sentence in that verse? Why he would tell them that? Now, because of a word here. Now this word right here is called atakum right here. Right here. It's this word right here. So now, right here, the difference between this verse and that verse is this word right here. And based on this word, things change in this verse because, well, as we said in the first verse, that ghanimtum, that means the spoils of war you gain through a fight. Now in this one, so over there in the first verse, if you go through war and you fight and you have spoils of war, then God will take a fifth of it and the rest is for you. Now, on this one, the main difference is that the fighter, it says over here, ma'afa. Afa is from fate. That means whatever spoils of war you get without fighting is called fate. Fate. Whatever spoils of war you gain without fighting is called fate. So God is saying, ma'afa Allah. As for gains granted by Allah, because they earned it without any fight. They just went there and the enemies just gave up, left the spoils, and they got it as for free without any effort. So they use the word fa. Now, because of this, the fighters here, God is now sending down an amendment or an exception to the first rule, which is saying that as for gains granted by Allah to his messenger from the people, they are for Allah. Now everything, all the spoils of war that they gain, everything is for Allah and the Prophet and for his close relatives, orphans, and poor and needy travelers. Now this was a shock to the warriors, to the fighters, because in the first verse they're supposed to get, the Prophet gets his share and everybody else divides the spoils. But here, God is saying, since you didn't earn anything and it was granted by Allah, fear, for He put the fear in them, and you gain all this spoils of war, you get nothing. Everything goes for Allah and the Prophet and these poor people, just to balance out society. But to but God gave him why. He says he tells them whatever the messenger tells you or gives you, take it as in such in this command, because this command came after he refused to give them anything. So God tells them in the verse that whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbade you from, leave it. So this was the reason that this verse came after that first verse. And now we understand that these two verses, the second verse came as an exception, or as an as a scenario in case they don't commit any war or fighting. So the first verse, if they commit war and fight and risk their lives, they get the prophet gets a fifth of the share, and the rest goes to the fighters. Now, in this scenario, when there's no fighting and they get the spoils, they don't get anything. And God is telling them that it's not on his own. I'm telling him how to divide it, because God has said it's for him. So he's telling the people that whatever the prophet is giving you, even though it might sound strange, you must listen to him. You must take it. And if he forbids you from, leave it. So no spoils of war. Fine. Everything is fine until this point. Now, 250 years later, Shafi'i came and he took this verse right here. وما أتاكم الرسول فخذوا وما نهاكم عنه. He took this verse right here and he established a religion based on it. He established a religion based on that. So you can see now, so he said that whatever the prophet gave you, take it, and whatever he forbade you from, leave it. He say this is proof. This is proof that we must obey everything that the prophet said and did, because what the prophet did and said is a reflection and of what the Quran is. So basically saying that the Quran is basically like the seed, and the prophet is the roots and the tree that explain and manifest from the Quran. So the prophet is the manifestation of the Quran. So the prophet is the carrier and the true translator of the Quran. So whatever the prophet said, you must listen to him, because he's not going to do anything without God's will and God's okay. So now, since the prophet died, and that's where he invented the sunnah, that the prophet had a sunnah. And sunnah means a way of life, or what people must follow, or people follow in. So people marrying is a sunnah. People working is sunnah. People arguing, being nice, everything, all walks of life, everything that we do in the walks of life, that every human being or community does, like around the world, like marriage is all around the world. People do that. That's a sunnah of God, that he wants people to marry. So that's a sunnah. The burials. So everywhere around the world, we all bury our dead in different ways, but we all bury them underground. So people give respect to the dead. That's a sunnah of God. What he establishes on people, and it continues going on and on over centuries. So this is called sunnah. So now Shafi'i constricted the sunnah to the prophet. Now everything that the people go through and every people do must go by and pass by the prophet. So the prophet is dead. So who's going to rule in the name of the prophet? Scholars. The scholars going to rule in the name of the prophet, and these scholars going to start arguing and debating among themselves. Some of them will agree with others, and some of them will disagree with others. It's just one huge mess, because this gave the scholars a huge playground to flip flop between or invent hadith or invent, because even in the sources, because now they don't need the Quran anymore. The Quran is just like a backdrop. It's just like a backdrop, like a wallpaper. But what they really read from and what they really tell you to do is from these hadith, these prophetic sayings that they gathered after the Prophet died 250 years ago. And they use that as their source instead of the Quran. Now, and because of this hadith, it contradicts each other. So they could pick and choose. Like today, they'll pick one hadith and nullify the other hadith that opposes it. But then 5 years down the road, they'll pick this hadith that they nullified 5 years earlier and nullify the hadith that opposes it. So it gives them, you see them flip flopping in their fatwas, in their judgment, in their ruling. You see that, and it'll expand all walks of life. I mean, and these scholars, the so-called scholars, they'll turn into scientists and physics and engineers and all that. They just sitting on their chair. They'll judge everybody. The biggest engineer, the biggest doctor, the biggest astronomer, the biggest uh, uh, military personnel. They're nothing because they all obey the scholar, because they're brainwashed since childhood that the scholars are everything. Scholars must bless you, not God. The scholars must bless you because they're mediators between the prophet and you. So the scholars are everything. And that's why the Sunnis or any denomination, they can never dare to think on their own. I just explained two verses in simple terms that were incidents and about how to avoid spoils of war. One incident, they'll get spoils of war, and the second incident, they don't get any spoils of war. So how can you chop up a verse? How can you chop up this verse right here and convert it into a religion? Right here, right here, right here. Now, the Sunni religion is established based on these right here. Just this half a chop, just one of the part. There's other verses we're going to go through, but not now. But this is just one verse. So just let this sink in. You understand how the Sunni religion was established. How this, when you are wondering why the scholars are so controlling. I mean, you thought the Soviet Union, the communism was controlling. Forget about that. That's child's play. This is controlling. The communists only lasted for 70 years, probably, right? 70, 71, 74 years. This has been going on since 1400 years, 1200, 1300 years. They've been controlling the masses in the name of God, in the name of the prophet, through one misinterpreted verse. From this verse, they invented a new religion and they prohibited, even though prohibition in the Quran or the sins or the major sins in the Quran are only 14. 14, that's it. If you look in their book, everything to them in life is just black and white. Sin, not sin. Sin, not sin. Halal, haram. Halal, haram. Even food, even rice is halal, haram. Even beans. You walk up to the streets and you see halal, haram. It has nothing to do with it. Everything must be labeled halal or haram, making life so miserable and so complicated. This is what they establish. And you wonder why traditional Muslims are full of ignorance and backwardness, and they never advance. They never advance. They never go anywhere because they have the scholars ruling over their brainwashing them and threatening them with heaven and with threatening them with hell and promising them heaven if they listen and obey them, be little good boys and girls, you'll go to heaven. Not God heaven, their heaven. Because I'm sure they have their own personal heaven. Because God is nowhere near agreeing to what that's why they're so backward. The West is following in God's footsteps, giving everybody freedom. They have set laws, everything, but now over here is just amazing to be amazed. So Here it is, and that should be it right now. I mean, these thoughts are on the whim, and I'm just gonna finish up right here and move to the main screen. So we just showed you two simple verses, how simple it was, and nowhere anywhere that these verses mean that they gave the people or these scholars to rule in the name of God. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere. It's a simple story. They fabricated the story that this is there's no even word when they say Sunnah of the Prophet. There's not even one word in the Quran talking about the Sunnah of the Prophet. Nothing, nowhere. They invented that. But the scholars and the ruling party saw their interest in it. Why not? So that's what they did. So this must come to an end, and I don't know. There's so many things to say, but I'll leave it at that right now. And we'll probably do a follow up uh, video, much better and much more organized. Right now, I'm just rambling through and just getting the thoughts out of my head. And we'll be back. I am SD. This is for Anomics, and thank you for following. We'll see you again.